Hi, Charlie.
Hi, we're just welcoming a couple more people. Hello and welcome. We've also just started recording for people who want to refer to this, but you've just missed some intro, so that's okay. So hello everyone. As Katie said, my name's Helga Henry. I am a consultant. I work as a freelance consultant with a number of different arts organisations, and I've worked in the arts for many years. I also had a spell of being a solicitor. So I worked in the arts for 10 years or so. Then I went and was a solicitor for about 12 years. And now I'm back in the arts since 2004. And I was a solicitor at a company called Rag & Co, which is now Gowling WLG. I'm not a solicitor now. I can't necessarily deal with legal issues, but what I do have an understanding of is what we're going to talk about today, which is company structures and the difference between going freelance, having a company, and then also if you go into the sort of area of not-for-profit organisations, the different types of vehicle, different companies that you can be as a not-for-profit or social enterprise, which is what a lot of arts organisations are. I've got slides, so I'll share them. Once I'm up there and you're sharing slides, it's a bit hard to see if people have got questions, but Katie's going to look out for it. But also, because we're a relatively small group, don't be afraid just to say something. I mean, you can put your hand up, but I might not see it. So also just don't be afraid to just ask and or use the chat. As I say, because there aren't too many of us already, would you like to say or to use the chat to tell me what you're particularly interested in, so that I can make sure I emphasize it, or I can make sure I cover it? So is it that you're freelance and looking to become a company? Is it that you're a student or employed and looking to become freelance? If people either pop it in the chat or people can just, put their hand up and shout out now.
I'll go first because we chatted about it before very briefly. So just to give everyone context, I am the development coordinator of Solihull SEP. So we're looking to see if we should become a thing or an informal network. So that's what I'm interested in.
So that's like unincorporated organisation into an organisation. Tamar said that they're interested in social enterprise. Natalie, I'm interested in how to develop an unincorporated group into something like a CIC, charity or social enterprise. Yes, Charlie?
I'm in post as an audience and participation development officer for the Brewhouse Arts Centre, but we come under East Staffordshire Borough Council. So I'm interested in terms of some of our community groups are already incorporated as CIC. So it's of interest just to see what that means in terms of funding streams, the different community groups that are regular users of our programme.
Perfect, yep. I'll just read, yes, Marcy, I'll come right
to you.
Sorry, I'm just going to, okay.
Go on.
I was going to read some out from the chat, but you go and then I'll do the chat.
No, I just wanted to say that I'm a sole trader. So I run a dance company, but not an organisation at the moment. So I'm just wondering which way to go to kind of make it an organisation, which is the best kind of route.
Perfect. That's exactly what we're definitely covering that. And Natalie Haslam, I'm interested in how to develop an unincorporated group into something like a CIC, charity social enterprise. Exactly what Katie was saying. Currently freelance, says Sophie, looking into social enterprise, not for profit or even a charity. Perfect. Abby Thompson, my dance company is limited by guarantee, just interested by different structures. Abby, spoiler alert, I think that's the most useful structure personally, but we'll get, Romy, I am setting up a CIC, but also run my freelance work separately as a sole trader. That's great, Romy, thank you. I'm kind of interested in to see what a lot of arts organisations become CICs, and I'm interested to know why. But we'll see it in a bit when we get there. That's really great. So I think what I've had planned, I was going to do some quite practical stuff about what you need to do to become a freelancer, but I might skip over that. But some of the stuff will be still useful in terms of running a business. So just to let you know, while I am a well, I say I'm freelance. Actually, I run my business through a limited company. Helga Henry Limited is a private limited company. I'm the sole shareholder. And so when people hire me, they hire my company. And if anybody's interested in being effectively a freelancer, but through a company, I can also talk to you about that. But that's great. That's really clear. We've got, we're down for 90 minutes. Really, that will depend. The material will take between 40 and 50 minutes. But then it will depend on questions, but I can certainly take people's questions, either as we go or as we go through. So without further ado, I'm going to put the share screen on, if that's okay. I'm just going to hide my view. Sorry, no, I can't. Okay, just that's great. So this one says company structures part 1 and part 2, just because the first bit I'm going to talk about for-profit structures and individuals, and you might, and while that I know a lot of you are interested in not-for-profit, I'm going to take you through this first, because if you understand the principles involved, you'll be able to translate them over to the not-for-profit world. Am I able to do this? So this looks a bit, this is actually what we're going to cover, and it looks a bit complex. But basically, when I talk to you about company structures, on the whole, we're talking about registered companies. By registered companies, we mean companies that have written some paperwork and sent it off to Companies House in order to become a company. Don't worry too much about the 3rd and 4th lines. But that means you can be a company limited by shares, limited by guarantee, an unlimited company. We're not going to talk about them. They're really, really rare. Or a CIC. And a CIC can then in turn be limited by guarantee or limited by shares. I'll explain all what these terms mean in a moment. If you're going to be a charity, you are going to be a company limited by guarantee, or you're going to be one of the special things that they do called CIOs. If you're a CIC, you cannot become a charity. But again, we'll come into that in a moment. So these are the sort of, this is the sort of family that we're working in. Oops, but before we even get to that, I want to start with the very simplest way that people can do business, and that is by being a sole trader. And I want you to imagine, and in order to do that, I'm just going to tell you a kind of an elongated story. Because actually, I know in the arts, we think about the need to do quite big things, you know, whether to run projects and get funding and have infrastructure. But in the simplest terms, if everything went wrong for me tomorrow, I could start a new business washing cars. I'd be a sole trader and I'd call it Helga's Cleanings. And really, I just need myself, really. There would be a couple of other things I'd need. I'd need some startup capital. Now, any business needs startup capital, but in the case of a window cleaning business, it's quite cheap, isn't it? It's a bucket, some sponges, some wax, some materials. Really, that's all you need. It's very quick. If you're going to be a dance workshop leader, you might not even need that, but you might need, say, a web presence. The use of a room. I know somebody who started a dance school just by having the use of a room and literally making some flyers, and people started turning up and she started taking money. Doesn't need very much. There's no incorporation or registration. You do have to pay tax, but you don't have to register anywhere to do that. You just have to start, get in touch with HMRC. And the way I would start doing business is I'd literally start knocking on doors, saying, can I clean your car? And then I'd take the cash. So my income would be my cash, my expenses would be dated, my startup capital would be the stuff I got to work, to set my business up. And my day-to-day expenses would be, if I was driving to an area, maybe my travel expenses, maybe I'd have some special clothing, it'd be very simple. My income would be the income from people washing the cars. My expenditure would be what I'd spent on actually getting the work. Maybe I'd had some flyers printed. Maybe I'd get some cards made. I'd give receipts for the income. And that'd be that. Very simple. I want to move on to the idea of liability now, because liability lies at the heart of some of the decisions you make as to what structure you're going to have. So I'm cleaning these cars. I keep my engagement ring on and I scratch a car. Who's liable for that scratch? Put it in the chat, or you can just, who might be liable? If I scratch a car when I'm a freelance, I'm a sole trader, who's got to pay to repair the damage? Not a trick question.
Surely it's yourself.
It is me, correct. Yeah, I am the freelancer. I have full responsibility because I might be insured for that, but there's no one else, is there? So start thinking about the idea of liability in terms of what you're responsible for in terms of your debt, and also what you're responsible for in terms of damage or anything that you're responsible for. And that can be mitigated by insurance. I was going to say, if people want to think about how they're going to set up as a sole trader, but it sounds like this, there's lots of, well, same thing actually for companies. There's lots of very good guidance on the .gov.uk website. This is the self-employed link, but also there's some resources I'm going to send. They've got lots of other very good good links about some checklists, some step-by-step things that you can do for other types of structures too. I'll come back to them in a minute. Imagine now that business picks up and I'm incredibly successful at cleaning cars, and soon there's more cars than I can shake a stick at, more cars than I know what to do with. So I've got a friend called Dean, and Dean says, oh, I can help with that. I like the idea of this. I'm a visual artist, but I'm quite liking the idea of all this money you're making cleaning cars. Perhaps we could do something together. They set up in partnership, and we're going to be have twice as many buckets and sponges and things, and we become Helga and Dean's Cleanies. This is an example of a partnership. Now, partnership is what happens. Good cat's bum picture, Katie. There, thank you. Cats are partnerships are what happens when two or more people decide to have a business enterprise in common. Now, the difficulty about that sometimes, particularly with artistic endeavours, is that you could inadvertently form one. You and a friend get together in order to put a show together, in order to start running a regular night, in order to start working on something. It could be that you have a partnership. But if you're going to go into business as a partnership, it's perfectly possible to do. And if you like, it's like an agreement between two freelancers to do something together. The best, you can just have a conversation. Dean and I could have done that on a handshake and carried on. But then what happens when, say, we agree to split the profits, but Dean's off for 4 weeks and I've worked his and my shifts to keep up the income, and he expects the income? What happens if, what happens if they change their mind and we've gone into a lot of expense to, there's all sorts of things that could go wrong. So what happens is, normally a partnership is made. The formality required is that there is a partnership deed. And a partnership deed is usually written by a solicitor. You can probably go online and find some precedents, some cheaper things, but really it's one of those things where if you're going to go into a partnership, it's probably worth getting proper advice to get things done. So that's the formalities. However, let's look again at, so again, compared to It's a bit more formal than compared to just knocking on someone's door and starting work. But now imagine in this scenario that it's not me that scratches the car, but Dean. Who's liable in this case to pay for the damage? Got some guesses, sorry. Both of you, exactly right. Two people in this, we both are. Now, we both are, and because in a partnership, the idea is that's the entity that's now. Now, again, we could be insured, but what if Dean has no money and actually can't pay for the damage? It's a picture of my engagement ring, because it's like, there's a thing when you're in a partnership called joint and several liability. So if Dean can't afford to pay for the damage, I'm liable, because we're both liable for everything. Now, you can get that changed in the partnership deed, and it's another really important reason to have one. But so if I've got no money and I have to sell my engagement ring to, I don't think my engagement ring has got quite such a big as diamond, by the way. But anyway, and I have to sell my engagement ring to pay for the damage, then that's what joint and several liability is. It's personal. So the first two things we've looked at, sole traders and partnerships, have what's known as personal liability. And that means you are liable. You're due to pay the debts. You're due to pay the things like damages, and you're liable for any any criminal or other actions. Business picks up some more. So now we decide to make a company, Clean Ease Limited. Now, the word limited in that sentence is really important, because we're moving from the realm of personal liability to limited liability. And in the case of a business, here we've got some, so let's pretend the figure in the middle is me, one of them's Dean, and one of them's Dean's dad. So we're going to start a company because our business, our cleaning business, is going so well. And Dean's dad says, "Oh, I'd like a bit of this. I'm going to give you some more capital to start up this company. You can maybe get some more people in." So now we have shareholders who've put in, my original startup capital of my bucket and sponge. Now that has turned into a financial interest. It might be that we've kept profits back to build the business, but we have shareholders. Whoops, sorry. Oh, goodness. We've got, and it's now ABC Limited that is dealing with the business. You see the other side, the sole trader. I took the money. I paid the tax on it. Now the business will take the money, the business will pay the expenses, and the business will pay tax. There's more formalities required to make a company. And the basic company by shares, Helga Henry Limited, I had to incorporate to Companies House. And you can do that one of two ways. You can fill out various forms, or sometimes you can buy a company that's already made and change its name. That costs about £30 or £40, but it's very quick if you know what you're doing. So you incorporate, and then for having incorporated, there's a record of who you are at Companies House, and there are certain formalities. And the reason for that is you can take your startup capital in terms of shares. You can take in money and give people a share of the business, and a share of the business means a share of the profits, or a share of the sale proceeds, should the company be sold, according to your share. I want to just go back a minute. There is this level of formality because limited companies get a big benefit, and that is, we'll come to it, that is that your liability is limited. The individuals concerned, the shareholders and the directors, are not liable for debts. We'll get into that. And it's that privilege that means that there has to be more formality. So you could take on employees. And now when an employee scratches a car, who's liable? What's the right of it? The company is. So now a company is known as a corporate entity. So it's like the company is a person. So that's the thing that's liable. So that's why businesses have insurance. Once you incorporate as you need it, at the very least, to have a thing called public liability insurance. So even as a kind of consultant, I have public liability insurance in case anything I do. It's not very much money, but you have to have one because it's unlikely I'm going to do anything that harms people. But if you're a dance company or an events company, or you're putting on workshops, that's when you have to be quite careful that you have not set, you're not dancing on a high podium that somebody might fall off, that you're not trailing cables that people might fall over. All that health and safety comes about because you have a duty to limit your liability, notwithstanding that you're operating as a company. So because you have this benefit now, if you can run up debt, so you can take on business loans, you can get credit. So often now, if you were to say buy a new laptop, if you bought it as a company, they'd give you 30 days to pay, or 60 days. You can get terms. You can buy things in bulk, sell it, and then wait until you've sold it to pay back. Because you've got that known as a credit risk, you also have to annually send in a return telling Companies House if there's any changes to your directorship, and you have to submit your accounts. You have to submit your accounts so that people who you are trading with can check up and see if you are creditworthy. It's also interesting to me that I work a lot in the creative industries, and people take on largish commitments with other companies. So like designers will work with an ad agency and go, yeah, they owe me 10 grand. And I go, well, have you checked that they're good for the money? It's like, well, of course they are, aren't they? It's like, you can check, all of these things are free and on Companies House for you to check companies and see what they're doing. Same with, and as you'll see when we get to not-for-profits, that's the same with charities. You can see what their turnover is, you can see what they spend on things, because they have certain privileges and they pay for that privilege with transparency. Does that make sense? Cool. So there are various advantages and disadvantages of being a sole trader to a limited company. Sole trader, absolutely no question. Quick, flexible, easy to set up. You are just limiting, you are liable for everything. So actually that makes people trade quite cautiously. They don't take on debt. They don't do things they can't afford to do because it's all down to them. So it keeps you, you're just liable for your own tax and NI. National insurance. So you need to just contact, again, that checklist, the gov.uk link I showed you gives you shows you how to do everything. But basically, you talk to the Inland Revenue, and tell them you're now working for yourself, that you and that you submit your accounts once a year. If they're straightforward, you could probably do it yourself. If not, an accountant should probably do your annual return for about £300 to £400. That might seem like a lot of money, but if it saves you thousands of pounds worth of tax, then it's clearly worth it. Save all your receipts. This is the same for anything. Save all of the receipts of anything to do with you delivering work, and think quite widely about that. Travel, accommodation, subscriptions to organisations, subscriptions to magazines. Do you need to wear certain clothing and shoes? Do you need to, any classes you attend, any ongoing development that you attend? Broadband, your website. Start thinking quite broadly about all those things, because if you make, say, £30,000 and then have £10,000 worth of expenses, that makes your income £20,000. The first £11,000 of that is tax-free, so you're only paying tax on £8,000. as opposed to if you don't collect in your receipts, you'd be paying tax on £18,000. It's quite different. I know nobody, so really be diligent about remembering what your expenses are. Are there any questions on what I've talked about so far? Is that kind of the sort of premises of it are clear? And I think you a lot of you are freelancers anyway, so some of this should be familiar to you. One thing I sort of jumped over just because it was more about freelancers, but in fact it's the same for companies. There's an app. Sorry about this. There's an app called One Tap Receipts. It's about £50 a year. There's a link there. I'm not, but I use them because when you're talking about receipts, it's an app where I take a photograph of the receipt. It stores it. It puts it all on a spreadsheet that you can export and keeps a photographic record of the receipts. And that's all you need for HMRC. So that odd coffee you have, that odd little notebook you pick up, the bit of stationery, you can just capture it all on the go. And it's way easier than sitting there at the end of the year, like laboriously going through things. It is, I think, in terms of, and of course the price of it itself is deductible. So it is quite the best £50 I think I spend in a year, because the amount of receipts I pick up because of it. You can also email receipts. So the minute anybody emails you an invoice, you can just send it straight to them and it's taken care of. I also don't have to do anything about storage or any classification. So to me, that's the one, it pays for itself. Absolutely. Okay. Sorry about that little. And as I say, you can do that either as a freelancer or as a company, but it's just brilliant either way. Anything before we, so that's stuff about for profit. Just actually to go back on the tax situation on a for-profit company. A for-profit company will have shares, and the shares entitle you, as I said, to two things: a share of the profits and a share of the sale, a share of the proceeds of the sale of the company, should the company be sold, and that will be according to your share. So in that thing where I had, Dean, me, and Dean's dad, he might have owned a third. He might have owned 20% of the company, and Dean and I might have owned 40%. If it was sold for 100,000, Dean's dad would get 20 grand, Dean would get 40 grand, and I would get 40 grand. So that's how shares work. But in terms of being paid as a director of a company and shareholder of the company, you can get a share of the profits. So Helga Henry Limited, I am paid in 3 ways. I'm an employee, and I get paid PAYE for that, but I'm only paid PAYE up to the tax-free threshold of 12 grand. So I'm an employee, but I don't pay any tax on that. I get a share of the profits because I am a shareholder. And that is taxed, but at a lower rate. And then the company itself pays tax on its profits. That makes, so I get paid through my salary and through my dividend. And then the company itself pays tax on its profits. But that ends up being slightly more advantageous for me tax-wise. But just by the by, and it did mean that as, when people were having furloughs, I wasn't really, well, there was no point in me being furloughed because I couldn't replace enough of my salary. My salary is very low. It's a grand a month salary. But then what happens is I'm paid out the dividends, and so that makes up the bulk of my the bulk of my pay. And again, I'm just saying that because it will be different in the not-for-profit sector, but if there's something, there are some dance companies who I know have set up in that very straightforward way and pay themselves that way. Okay. So that's the for-profit world. If everyone's clear on that, and I know that's the less important, that I think that's the one that people think are less important. Are we ready to move on to part 2, which is about not-for-profit? Is anyone, I'm just going to check the chat. If anyone's got any questions about that, you're good? We're good to move on? Thumbs up, very good. So, a lot of you will have heard about governance. Oh, hang on, quick, there's something in the chat with it. Might say, carry on. Yeah, good, thank you, Seth. You might have heard about governance. Governance is just the way the company is run, and that people are the structures that people put in place to make sure that they're meeting their legal and other obligations. And so within a profit model, you'll have seen that obviously as you get to bigger companies, and I'm not really going to talk about them today, but you get to bigger companies, you'll have a board, an executive, divisions, you'll have a very big company. In arts companies, but in arts companies, it's usually a not-for-profit model. So that means that there's a different governance model, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Because what normally happens in a not-for-profit model is that you have board members, directors, trustees who are not paid. And they're not paid to work, they're only paid to oversee the organisation. So for-profit companies have shareholders, as I mentioned. And so if you're a for-profit company, you have shareholders, and your duty, if you like, is to make profit to deliver benefit to those shareholders. You're there to do whatever it is you're there to do, I don't know, run a hotel chain, run a hotel, but it's by running that hotel chain that you are delivering value, profit, money back to your shareholders. And because shares are things that can grow 2 ways, shares can give you an income from people's profits, and then also the value of the share will grow with the value of the company. They become quite attractive investments in and of themselves, which is why separately, in really large companies, the shares themselves are traded on the stock exchange. Okay. But that doesn't happen in the arts, and it really doesn't matter. But I'm just explaining that a for-profit company, therefore, is driven by shareholder value, because they want to grow the company to make the value of the shares bigger for their shareholders to ultimately sell or trade, and they want to drive profit so their shareholders get a little annual dividend. Okay, so everything about for-profit companies is about growth. The not-for-profit nomenclature is a complete, I hate the term really, because it doesn't tell you what the truth of it is. The truth of it is you are for profit. You are for surplus. If you don't make a surplus, you go out of, you can't make a loss and you can't break even. There's no future in either of those scenarios. You have to make a profit. But what you don't do is you don't distribute that profit to shareholders. And you don't distribute that profit to shareholders because there are no shareholders. The not-for-profit sector is massive. And I've just sort of shown you some pictures there. The not-for-profit sector is massive. It's and these organizations are not breaking even or making a loss. They're making a surplus, and it's getting plowed back into whatever it is it's doing. So if it's guide dogs for the blind, it's guide dogs. If it's Christian Aid, it's foreign aid. If it's Samaritans, it's their services. Years ago, I was doing a workshop like this, and I overheard somebody at the beginning, a young person saying, "It's fantastic. I work for a not-for-profit, so I don't have to think about money at all." And it's like, you clearly haven't worked for one for very long, because if you work for a not-for-profit, that's all you think about. And if you work in the arts, you think you're thinking about art. You're thinking about art about 10% of the time. If you're running a company, you're thinking about money about 90% of the time. I'm exaggerating slightly, but there is a wider point that if you want to really just pursue art for the sake of it, or just have lots of time to be creative, you might be better off being an employee, because this really requires people to get their head around it. But the brilliant thing about being a not-for-profit is that it's nearly 85% of the time, yeah. If you are a not-for-profit, you get to choose what you are for, and that's the social enterprise bit. That's the bit that people are able to. That's the thing that people really get a kick out of. This is a bit of an old anti-capitalist thing, but but it's a bit of a caricature. But there is, and of course, there are plenty of for-profit, very reputable, very honourable, decent companies who are good companies to work for, that treat their people well, blah blah blah. But technically, you might say that the for-profit goals are about shareholders, high returns, money, profit. I think increasingly that's changing as people start to see that that's not tenable, particularly around the area of the environment. And I think the other thing we have to kind of accept is that we live and work in a capitalist economy, and that actually everything, our lifestyles are predicated on a certain level of growth. That said, non-profit goals are usually about community, society, health, welfare, and the greater good. I think if you live in an area of very high unemployment and some big company comes in and opens a factory and gives lots of people jobs and security and food on the table, I think that's also about the greater good. So, I mean, I don't think it's quite as black and white as it puts there. But so if we're now talking about the not-for-profit area, we're going to go through a very similar sequence to the one we did about Helga's Cleanies, Helga and Dean's Cleanies, and Cleanies Limited. It's just when we get to the Cleanies Limited, there are kind of a few more tentacles you can follow. So the first one is the unincorporated association. And Katie, that's what you were saying, that there's so here I've got a little picture of some kids playing football, because very often an unincorporated association could be a sports team, could be a play group, could be any sort of gathering where people get together. And there are things like, these things can go on for years. They will probably have a list of rules, or sometimes called regulations, or they'll have some sort of terms of reference. They can take in money. But the money will usually just be to immediately defray expenses. It's not there to make a profit. And if there is anything surplus left over, so if they've sold teas at the local, they've sold teas and coffees at a tea stand at the football club, and there's money left over, it normally gets carried forward to they'll buy uniforms for the next season, or it'll all just stay in, dealt with informally. Don't really have to worry about it. There's certainly no formal registration requirements. Right, next up, we've got community interest companies. And community interest companies have been formulated for a very specific reason. And I think they get used a lot in the arts now for other reasons. So let's take the words, each word as we go. Community. So you have to nominate a community of people that your company is going to benefit. And that can be a geographical community, it very often is, but it could be a community of people with the same interests. So I might decide to set up a community interest company because I like steam trains, and there's a group of people who are going to preserve steam engines. The community interest bit is that there is something, an asset, there's something of benefit that needs to stay within that community. And the company is the bit that gives it the limited liability. The picture here is of a thing called the Glenelg Skye Community Owned Ferry. Okay. Or rather the Isle of Skye Ferry CIC. So if you can imagine, if you live on Skye and you want to get to the mainland, the ferry, the presence of a ferry is really, really important. And you don't necessarily want to rely on it being owned by a privately owned corporation, so Fred Olsen or P&O or any of those sort of commercially run lines, because if it ever became uneconomic, back to the profit motive or back to the for-profit goals, they might say, well, this isn't, you know, it's like community buses used to get getting cut. People go, this isn't financially viable. We're not going to run this service anymore. So the people of Skye founded a CIC and bought a ferry boat that then is owned and operated by the Isle of Skye Ferry CIC. The community is very clearly that of the community of the people of Skye and the people on the mainland who want them to come, and tourists. You know, there's a very clear community that is served by this, and the asset is the boat and the mooring and all of that, anything that's. So the thing that a CIC has is what's known as an asset lock, which means that if I've never really read this sign. It says visit the lighthouse at the top of the jetty for a cup of tea and buy some souvenirs. So again, they'll be trading. But if for any reason the Isle of Skye Ferry CIC went bust, they couldn't give the ferry to Fred Olsen. They couldn't give it to a commercial entity. They would have to give it to an organisation with similar aims and objectives, who would also to benefit the same community. Okay, so they couldn't even give it to, they couldn't give the ferry, I think it's a chain ferry actually, so they couldn't anyway, but they couldn't give it to another island in the Highlands. It would have to stay for the benefit of the people of Skye. So community interest companies are there to preserve an asset and keep it in the use and for the people that they already set it up for. So you could see that maybe if you set up an arts workshop in a former barn in the New Forest, you know, that you'd want to maybe set that up as a CIC to keep to preserve the building and the asset for the people of the New Forest, and that it couldn't go to a property developer and suddenly become a big, you know, couldn't become a spa retreat, whatever. Does that make sense? So CICs, you register with Companies House the same way, and you can be a not-for-profit CIC or a for-profit CIC. Because the thing about the CIC is not whether you distribute the shares or not, distribute the profits or not. It's about the fact that you keep that asset in place for the community you've declared it. I know lots of arts organisations, lots of emerging arts organisations often register as a CIC because they like the idea of the sort of asset lock and they think it's kind of a nice not-for-profit thing. I don't know that arts organisations have sufficient assets to really justify an asset lock. personally. A lot of people all make a CIC because it's literally the forms, like the documentation's on the website, and you have to do what they say, and you fill that in, and you're done. And lots of people like the idea that somehow that this will get that it gets carried on. I think there are some disadvantages to a CIC. Well, there are some disadvantages which, if they're not relevant, then go ahead, that's fine. One is that you actually have to be quite careful. It is regulated, and you need to know what the rules are to follow the rules. So I incorporated and ran a CIC for a little while, and we forgot to put the word CIC on our accounts, and we got fined £150. It's like very simple, but it's like, I know, and now I've told you, so you won't do that. But there were some little rules and regulations. The big one is, and I get lots of people coming to me saying, we really want to become a charity, and I go, what are you now? And they say, we're a CIC, and I go, you can't. You cannot convert from a CIC to a charity. You have to start again. So you can become a CIC knowing that you can't become a charity, and that's okay, or knowing that if you change your mind and want to become one, you're starting again. Any questions on CICs?
When you say starting again, do you mean like it has to literally be new name, new mission, new everything?
No, I mean new corporate structure.
Right.
You'd have to set up a new company.
Mm-hmm.
So, there'd have to be a new corporate entity. But don't forget, that would also then mean you'd have to change your bank. It could be the same bank, but it'd be a new bank account. It'd be, so that's when I say start again. And so it's not that much of a biggie, but when you're applying for things, you'd have to go, this was when we were a CIC, we did this, this, and this, and now we're this. So it's not a, but you wouldn't, you'd lose your new bank account, but obviously no, your mission and everything would be the same. Yeah. You might have trouble, and then when you wind it up, that's the thing about the asset lock. I don't know what you do about the assets, because you'd be winding up the CIC and starting again, and I don't know how that works if you go to a different company that's not a CIC. Does that make sense? I think it would be more complex than, I've never had to do it, because my advice is not to get yourself in that position in the first place. Can you easily change from a CIC to a limited company? No, you can't. That's what I'm saying. Once you're a CIC, you're a CIC. And you become it. If you want to become something else, you start. When I say you start again, you set up a new company. The key rules to follow, as you mentioned. Sorry, Tamar, I don't know many of them, but it's just they're regulated. It's all very clear, but it was just, as I say, I fell foul of not filing the accounts in the right way. Oh, and that's because I did use an accountant, but he'd never done it either. To be fair, that was many years ago when they were very new. So I think they're a bit more common now. But just if you were to set up as a CIC, make sure that your accountant knows how to do that. So there are things about so the regulations that I'm aware of is just, you have to, if something happens to the asset, you have to tell them. If something happens, and otherwise it's just the regular things. You have to say certain things on your accounts. It's those sorts of things. It's no biggie. It's not massive, but get people around you who are used to dealing with CICs is what I'd say. Does that help, Tim?
Thank you. Yeah, it does help. I've got a sore throat, sorry, so I'm trying to
no, that's no problem. Yeah, just use the chat, that's not a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on from CICs. What a lot of people call a social enterprise, and I think a social enterprise really is a catch-all phrase for anything that's not for profit, really. But often when they're talking about a social enterprise, they talk about company limited by guarantee. So again, when we had the company limited by shares, you could see that the shareholders were putting in some capital, so that people, you could see that they wanted the company to exist. They were doing something to make that happen. A company limited by guarantee hasn't got the same thing. So this is in the event that a company that's a limited company goes bust, with certain very key exceptions, which I'll talk about in a minute. If you are a shareholder of the company, you're not liable for the debts. And if you're a director of the company, you're not liable for the debts, because the company is liable. The exceptions to that are, if there are a few exceptions, and there I've got time to go into them now, but that's what the governance thing is about. It's if you have knowingly carried on trading when you knew you were going to be insolvent, you were insolvent and you knew there was no prospect of you meeting your debts. If you breach certain statutory provisions, or if you have been, if there's been any fraud. But ordinarily, if you have been trading correctly, if you haven't been trading insolvently, and if you haven't been fraudulent, you are not liable for the debts. Up to the value of the shareholdings that you may not have paid for yet. Okay, so there's a limit. If you want to set up a company and you're not going to have shareholders, you still need people to stand as a guarantor for the company. And that means you have a company that's set up without shareholders, but with a group of people who say, yes, we want this company to exist. We think it's a good idea. We subscribe to the idea of this company. So you have subscribers, and their liability is set. Their liability is set to an amount that's usually said in the constitutional documents. It used to be £1, now it's £10, I think. But it's a very low amount. Should the company become insolvent, the guarantors are only liable up to a very limited amount. I can see there's a couple of questions. Sorry, Tamar, there isn't a difference between a CIC and a social enterprise. A social enterprise is like an umbrella term, and then the specific, so you can be a CIC and you could be a social enterprise. You could be a company limited by guarantee and be a social enterprise. It's social enterprise hasn't got a specific legal meaning. It's more of a, what's the word, just a general descriptor. Just like you might say, I'm in business. You know, I run a business, and that could be a PLC. That could be a PLC, a company a limited company, or a partnership. It's just one of those. It's not got a specific legal term. But often when people talk about a social enterprise, they sort of mean company limited by guarantee. No, that's right. So company by limited by guarantee, you are making a profit, but the profit is going back into the company. It's not going to those guarantors. It's not going to shareholders. So it's very suitable for arts organisations. Depending on the way your constitution is written, you can pay your directors. Your directors could be paid to be directors. And you are liable for tax. You are liable for tax on your profits. So you make a surplus, you pay tax on that surplus, and then what's left goes back into the company. Often arts organisations who are company limited by guarantee work out their finances quite carefully to make sure that they're not sitting on a stack of cash at the end of the year, or that if they are sitting on a stack of cash, that it's allocated to a future project, that its money is received in advance. So say you got a grant in March for a project that's going to run from March to December, you'd actually make sure that you'd apportioned your costs appropriately, because otherwise you'd be paying tax inappropriately. So again, you need to have good accounting, good financial skills, and somebody who knows how to do that, knows how to apportion money correctly. For us, you get into yourself a bit of a pickle and pay tax you don't need to. By the way, I'm all for paying tax, and I pay exactly as much tax as I'm supposed to, but I don't agree with paying more tax than you need to because you don't know how to apportion your money. Anything else about that? Yeah, you trade in the normal way. You would, a lot of arts organisations are companies limited by guarantee. If you are a company limited by guarantee, well, if you are anything actually, and you want to have regular, you can have one-off funding. If you want to have regular funding from somewhere like the Arts Council, you need to be a company limited by guarantee or a charity or a CIC, but you can't have paid directors on your board. You can't. So, for example, if I'm, say, the artistic director or the artistic director of a dance company, and I want to be in receipt of regular funding, I can't be on my own board. My board must be other people who are not paid. I can be on and not paid if I'm not paid to do the whole work, but I can't be on the board and paid. This has massive implications about control. So again, when you're thinking about a company that you might want to become, think about control. Not necessarily that people will want to tell you, I want you to make a play about corkscrews. So I'm standing bar, and I really want you to do that. The sort of control that boards will, I think people start to think about the artistic control that they might lose, but actually it's other things. It's you might want to you want to give everyone a pay rise, and the board might say, no, you've just had a pay rise, we can't afford that. You might want to take a stand about something, and your board might go, well, I think that's a bit risky. I don't think you should speak out about that issue. That's just something to think about further down the line. Pick it up. So finally, I'm conscious of time. We're going to look at, there are different types of charity. I think that was supposed to be a picture of a dancer to make it relevant. But there are different types of charity. The company limited by guarantee is not itself a charity, but it can become a charity in a way that the CIC can't. So first of all, you can only become a charity if you are in pursuit of one of these four things: the relief of poverty, the advancement of education, the advancement of religion, or other purposes beneficial to the community. Arts organisations are almost exclusively educational charities. I sometimes go, can you guess? But we haven't got time. Other purposes beneficial to the community. I would have thought that it would be other purposes beneficial to the community, but it really isn't. That fourth head tends to be for medical charities and medical research charities. But if you go onto Companies House, and you can, and look at the memorandum, the governing documents, don't even think you have to go there. You just look at the headline pages for any arts charity you care to look at. You'll see what their what's it's known as their objects. So every organization has to have its objects. Its objects are what it's there to do. The for profit, what are you, if you're not for profit, what are you for? And you'll see they often will say the advancement of education in dance in the West Midlands, or the advancements of education in the appreciation and presentation of theatre. And then we'll have some other things, but they will almost exclusively be the advancement of education. The idea being that by doing your art form, by showing that to the public, so it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a dance school, but by pursuing your craft, by being a choreographer and making shows, or by doing whatever, you're advancing the education of people's appreciation of contemporary dance or whatever. There are significant benefits to being a charity, which I'm going to talk about, and because of that, you need to register with the Charities Commission. And there are two types now of charity that you can become. The full registered charity, if you like, is that you is a two-step process. You register as a company limited by guarantee with a certain within an agreed form, with an agreed incorporation document. And that document is available actually on the charity's website. They say, have you used our form of charity limited by guarantee? You say yes, and off you go. But you don't do that with the Charity Commission. You do that with Companies House. You register, you fill out a form that says all sorts of things about how you operate, what you're doing, how you're, who your trustees are, how you're going to manage things, how you manage safeguarding, all sorts of things. And then you get to be, they will say, yes, we'll take you on as a charity or not. I'll talk about the benefits of being a charity in a moment. There's a new format for being a charity, which is simpler. You simply fill out a form on the charity's website. You become a CIO, a charitable incorporated organisation. It has to be in a specific format. You can either be a membership organisation or a subscription organisation, it's kind of known as, but you choose which you're going to be. You register direct with them, and then you simply do your annual returns and send in your accounts to the Charity Commission. That stops the duplication. If you're a registered charity, you have to do your annual accounts, you have to do them in a certain format, and they have to be registered both with the Charity Commission and with Companies House. If you're just a CIO, if you're CIO, it's just the Charity Commission. Okay, is that clear? This one it's all on the website, what you have to do. Again, it's quite a long questionnaire talking about how you're going to do business. And then the final, it's quite a long questionnaire. And then finally, what you do is, and then your constitutional document has to be in the form that they've already given you. You just fill that out. Any questions before I just go into this last bit about comparisons? Are they clear? Okay. So what you can see, so the things on the left-hand side are the things about company limited by guarantee. Things on the right are about the charitable organisations. So that's whether that's a registered charity or a CIO. CIOs were quite new. About 5 years ago, people didn't know, whether big funding, people like Paul Hamlin or Esme Fairbairn would fund them. That's all gone away now. It seems very straightforward. I think the other thing to say is if you want to become a charity, you need to reckon on it taking between 4 to 6 months to get through the Charity Commission at the minute, because they've got a massive backlog. And well, certainly during lockdown they had a massive backlog, and I think they're working through that. But it takes some months. It's not just I'm going to send my form in and 6 weeks later I'm going to get there. It'll take them a few months to actually get to you and look at it. Then they'll probably have some queries. Then you have to go through clarification. So it takes some months. If you're a company limited by guarantee, even though you're a not-for-profit, you will have a limited ability to fundraise from trusts and foundations. And this is because trusts and foundations tend to give only to registered charities. If you're a registered charity, you are of course eligible to fundraise from trusts and foundations, but please don't become a charity with that as your only reason, because there are no guarantees at the moment. It's absolutely dog eat dog out there in terms of charity fundraising. Everybody goes, oh yeah, I'll talk to Paul Hamlin, and I'll talk to Esme Fairbairn. Nobody spells that right, because they're very big grant givers. Gulbenkian, very big grant givers. But because they're very big grant givers, they literally have thousands of applications as well. You know, it's very competitive. So I wouldn't become a charity solely for that reason. There may be other reasons as well. There's lots of other reasons, but as a company limited by guarantee, you are able to apply for Arts Council fundraising. If you want long-term, like NPO funding, you'd have to move the directors. If you're an employee and you're on the board, you'd have to move off it, but that's over a long time. Of course, charities are able to apply for Arts Council England funding. You also, with both of them, can do things like you might be eligible for theatre tax relief. Theatre tax relief is just things about making performance shows and getting tax relief on that. But there's an equivalent called gallery tax relief, which you can only get if you're a charity. But that's less important to all of you because you're not visual arts organisations. When you're a charity, you can get some discounts on things like software, and there will be lots of things that if you go, oh, we're a charity, you know, you might get discounted training. They make training places available, you know, if you're a charity employee. A bit like educational discounts, things like certain places may give you discounts because you're a charity. Again, not the sole reason to become one. Yeah, this is the tax. A company limited by guarantee will pay corporation tax on its surplus. Here are some of the big advantages. A charity pays no corporation tax. It pays no business rates on its premises. Oh, okay. Can sometimes, but as a company limited by guarantee, you can sometimes get a rebate on your business rates on premises, but it's entirely discretionary. And if you're in Birmingham, that's going to be increasingly difficult because they ain't going to give you any discounts on anything because they can't afford to. Yeah, theatre tax relief will be available to both of them. A theatre limited by guarantee can, depending on the constitution, have paid staff members on the board. So, for example, an AD or an artistic director or an exec director could be a board member. Don't forget, that's but that brackets, but long term the Arts Council won't let that happen. But in a charity, no paid staff can be on the board. So the artistic director or the exec director cannot be board members. And so that you start to think about issues around control. Corey Baker, the dancer, I helped him incorporate as an organisation. And in the end, he just operated as because once I said, you won't own your dance pieces. And he went, what do you mean? I went, well, if you're employed by a company limited by guarantee, or if you're employed by a charity, it's the company that owns your choreography, not you. And he went, but I want to own my choreography. And I said, well, I didn't start your own company, I'd started. So what he did was he started a company limited by he's private limited company, and then anytime he needed to do an artistic project, he just partnered with somebody who could apply for the funding. But you know, as you don't know if you know he's now worked on the Commonwealth Games opening and closing ceremonies. He did the opening, he did a special commission for COP24, he did something for RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, it's extraordinary what he's doing. But control was a big thing for him. Thank you, Tamar. So she's saying it's good feedback about it. So think about that. Also isn't to say that if you join a company, you can't come to a deal about your choreography. So it could be that you work in the company as a company member, an AD, but then reach a separate deal about or reach a copyright deal about your choreography. But don't assume that you own it, particularly if you're an employee, even if you're an employee of your own company. I won't say Rosie K right now, but Rosie K. Anyway, so yes, so just really have a little think about how you want to work that. If you're a charity, you have certain restrictions on your trading activity. It doesn't mean you can't trade, but you can only trade up to a certain amount. You can only do certain things. You cannot do any, well, you cannot do any party political activity. Of course, you can do political activity. It's a big thing about that, if you've seen it at the minute. So you might want to create a piece of work that highlights the plight of people in Gaza, and you could do that. You couldn't create a piece in support of the Tory party's decision to veto abstain in the UN, the recent UN vote. That's party political. Does that make? Can you see the difference? You might be able to talk about political issues. Of course you can. It's a freedom of speech issue, but you can't come out in favour or against a particular politician or political activity. If you're a company limited by guarantee, there's very little activity on your activity because of your status. But what you need to think about is, again, your funders, or you may have some restrictions because of that. Sorry, Tamar, yes, that does apply to a dance, any company. If you're employed by the company, anything you create in relation to your terms of employment belongs to the company. It's not, I'm not, that's just so it doesn't matter what sort of company. It could be a PLC, CIC, private company. Sorry, just they're having a tea break immediately outside, so sorry about the noise, but we're nearly there. Yeah, so very little restriction on activity. And finally, in terms of your accounts, charity accounts are very special. They're specialist. They've got these special 4 columns you have to use about restricted and unrestricted funds. It costs more to make them. There's a thing called the SORP, the Statement of Received Practice, and that means that you have to do it in a certain way. Sorry, I'm just going to let these people walk past a little bit. They're all saying goodbye in a group. There's donuts. They've all left the donuts. Statement to receive practice. That's a bit more expensive. Again, it's not a reason not to become one, but it's something to factor in. And with a company limited by guarantee, there are no specific requirements for funders. I think that is the end of my slides. Questions. There you go. I'll take my slides off now for questions. So any questions? Took a bit longer than I thought. Any questions for anyone?
What would you do in my situation then, based on what you said? What kind of structure would you put a SEP into if it was to formulate?
First of all, I'd really ask, do you need to? If you need to raise funds, well, what would I do? The lawyer's answer is that depends. If you think your main, and partly that depends on how you think you're going to raise money. If you think your main thing is going to be charitable funding, then I'd probably go straight to something like a CIO. I mean, this is not advice, but on what you've told me and what I know about SET. An interim would be to become, of course, but then an interim could be to become a company limited by guarantee, see how you get on. You could become a company limited by guarantee using the Charity Commission format. So you've already got that there. Make sure your objects are charitable, but not become a charity yet, to see how you go. So that keeps your options open either way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's weighing up the difference between just staying as we are, actually.
Yeah.
If it is worth it, that's ultimately.
It's not straightforward, and it can be a lot of work. So you also have to know, you also have to know that the additional money it gives you access to, or the additional whatever, is going to be worth it for the additional cost of compliance, formulation compliance, and ongoing maintenance. So you really have to have a business, you know, like it needs to be, what's your business plan, really? But that certainly is. So my favorites at the minute would be a little bit of, you know, if you're pretty sure that's what you're going to go to, I'd go to CIO, not bother with being a registered charity now, because there seems to be hardly any difference in terms of what you're able to do or not do. And if you're not sure, I always think a company limited by guarantee is a good middle step. Just because at the CIC you're trapped into a CIC. Any other questions? Romy, do you mind me asking why you became a CIC? What was it what attracted you to it?
Yeah, let me just turn my camera back on. Well, I'm now double questioning all my decisions. So I'm like in the middle of applying, registering as CIC.
Yeah.
It's the company, it's not really an arts company. We do work around body image for young people and using exercise to help with mental health and well-being and improving body image. So that's where it's like very for the community of young people working around body image, which is why we've gone towards a CIC rather than.
But what assets will you have to pass on?
Yeah, that's the thing. The asset lock, we wouldn't necessarily need it as much. So we've gone with the CIC because I was, you know, the ISE company.
Yes. Yeah.
I went on there. They've got like a
Institute for Social Enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah, they've got like an incubator sort of program for people looking at setting up businesses. So that's why it's very like CIC driven, because we've developed it with them in mind. But yeah, we wouldn't necessarily need the asset lock. So is there, apart from the asset lock, is there other reasons why you would go for a CIC over another sort of structure?
Well, not to my mind, but then, you know, that's the thing. I think if you haven't got, I know lots of arts organizers say they do because they like the idea of it, or that a lot of people say it's because they can stay on the board and stay paid. So yeah, there's a real mix. But to me, and the big thing is the asset log. But I think for arts and that I can really see it if you are setting up a computing club for kids, or that you've got a body of assets that you know, physical, and of course I know you'll have intangible assets, but I don't know, just that for me is. But also, if you don't think you're ever going to become a charity, or you don't think that's going to be the way you go forward, a CIC is as good as anything else, and so it's fine. Do you know what I mean? It's just, I think for arts organizations, when they become it thinking they can become well, if that doesn't figure out, they can become something else, and they really can't. And also, it's quite hard. It's not impossible, but it's kind of hard to get. You can get Arts Council funding, but you can't get any other type of funding. And no organisation is going to exist solely on Arts Council funding in the future. Not even NPO, not even regularly funded organisations. Nothing is. The funding is only going down. Yeah, Charlie.
I think you might have answered my question already, Helga. The idea of assets being tangible and intangible, I wonder if you could give a couple of examples of what might be considered an intangible asset as well as a tangible one.
A database. So a list of, a database, an online, a set of online learning resources. Things like that, really. So often arts organisations will say it's their database, which is the which is the asset over which there's an asset lock, and that people who, if you then, so I ran a membership organization for creative industries, and our asset, we wound it up, but our asset was the database. But frankly, unless you really maintain databases brilliantly, it's just an email list, really. I can't really say it was the most valuable thing, particularly given that a lot of people work emails, that, you know, people change jobs every 2 years. I don't know really that it was, but that would be what, you know, that would be a sort of thing that would classify as a, can't think of anything else. Yeah, that's the sort of thing you're going to. Hang on, I'm going to, just 2 seconds. I'm going to plug myself in, which means me slightly moving because I couldn't be anywhere near a plug, but I've done very well. Bear with me. Aha, right. That's all right. I'll just stay here. So, because we haven't got very much longer, but I just wanted to make sure that we were okay. Okay, anything else? If we want to do more research, find out what, well, glad you asked, Natalie. So if we want to do more research or find out more, where should we look? I've sent to Katie a bit of a resources paper that will send you some other information. I've also in my signature put my email, no, my website, but my email is helga@helgahenry.com. And also, so feel free to just email me any queries you've got. But as I say, I will be sending up a follow-up that's got some bits about governance, got some bits about charitable structure, and some bits about, certainly in the first place, I say this actually a lot, beware sources of online information. Because you'll be searching in the English language, you might get answers that are English or Australian, and it'll look like, oh yeah, this all seems very legit. Yeah, I can do this and this and this. So I'm just seeing a question from Tamar. But beware that you have to make sure that it's English law. And so for those reasons, I would say keep to things like the Charity Commission website and the gov.uk website. The Arts Council might have some, but any professional bodies, make sure voluntary arts is pretty good, but look at those sorts of things, not just random questions on the internet. I don't know, but Tamar, would it be best if we be directors of our own CIC and work voluntarily with stone control? Well, if you're directors of your own CIC, I don't know what you can be paid. That there's nothing, that there isn't any issue around control with the CIC. Control comes if you have to have a voluntary board of management, which you can't be on. So that's another reason why a lot of people have CICs, because they can stay on the board and be paid. But what you can't do if you do that is be funded long term by the Arts Council. Okay. Okay. Any more for any more? Right then, that's 28 minutes past, not done badly. Can I pass back over to you, Katie, and we'll just close up?
Thank you. Fab. Yeah, thank you again to Helga. My brain is a bit boggled after that. I'm sure everyone else is too. So yeah, thank you so much. I will get those resources sent out. Did you say you've got another one to send me still, or is this the?
No, I sent you.
So it's just that one, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that one. You can have and obviously the recording, and you can have the slides, but I don't know if the slides are that helpful per se, because they're just pictures. But if
no
anybody
problem.
wants them, though.
So yeah, I'll send that out by the end of today. You'll all have that, and I'll just include your email on it as well, Helga. Just
sure. Yeah. Happy to. Yeah. No problem. I think it's on the slides. Yeah, it's on the handout rather. It's on the handout.
Great stuff. But yeah, with that, thank you everybody for coming along. And as I say, our next session is in January with Oliver Scott delivering his research on how to survive and thrive in dance participation. So it'll kind of lead quite nicely on from his company structures, because he's looking at all these different kind of versions of things. So actually it might be a nice follow-up.
Yeah.
But it's our last one of the year. So with that, everybody have a lovely Christmas.
Yeah, have a great break. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, happy anything else. And I'll leave you to it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Helga.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.